Welcome back. I have a cool guest joining me today. His name is Randy, and he works for Parks and Wildlife. Randy, how are you doing?
Eric, I'm doing fabulous. Thanks for having us on.
Of course. This has been a crazy summer. Has it been crazy for you guys as well?
It is definitely 2020 is full of surprises. You have to be a little careful that you go, oh, I don't know what'll happen next. So it's certainly been full of surprises for Parks and Wildlife as well. A lot of things going on when we went into the summer. Coming into March and April, we were expecting COVID to kind of have some impacts and expecting to see that kind of down budget cycle and maybe parks that might be closed due to the pandemic and all of those things. And it completely went the other direction on us. We're very proud of the fact that we were able to keep all state parks open throughout the spring and summertime for people to have the opportunity to get out and recreate and to be able to kind of make sure their mental health was okay because going outside seemed to be such an important part of that. But we headed into the year with budget concerns and fears about potential cutbacks and maybe not as many temporary employees and summer employees and interns and all of those things. And it turned into exactly the opposite of that, and record crowds for most of the parks in Colorado.
With in lieu of a pandemic, I wouldn't have imagined that you guys would have seen overcrowding. But even with COVID, you guys were seeing overcrowding.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was really interesting, and talking to the park managers as all of this wrapped up. One of the big things was, we were used to in the summertime seeing full campgrounds on the weekends, seeing full parking lots on the weekends as people came out and would recreate. What we saw this year was literally full campgrounds on Tuesdays, on every day. One of my park managers mentioned the other day, he said it was like the 4th of July every day, all summer long. And so that's, it has this impact. It has an impact on the resources. It has an impact on the staff. But it was definitely very, very busy.
Wow. So I guess one could argue, being out in the wide open spaces would make it you would be safe. Um, Crazy. That's crazy, crazy.
Yeah, with COVID, we did things like having to make sure that visitor centers were closed, or that for a while we had visitor centers completely shut down. We had a lot of different camper services shut down, and all of those things. Campgrounds were closed for a few weeks, early in May, which created some challenges. But in spite of all of that, it continued to be very, very busy with just people showing up, and we did our best to make sure people were socially distancing, wearing masks in facilities and common areas and things like that.
So more people means more trash and more compost and more bathroom cleanings. What was that like trying to accommodate for these unexpected um, boosts in numbers?
Well, like our park managers were saying, it's the 4th of July every day, and it was actually pretty taxing and tough to keep staff motivated and all of those things, and working at that level and having to staff up with temporary rangers and seasonal employees, helping people park in the right spots and not take advantage of just pulling up on a curb and parking on some grass somewhere, which people will do if they're not familiar with where they're supposed to go. So it was really, it was stressful. But one of the most interesting things I think that I've heard from our park staff throughout Northwest Colorado was the fact that these these visitors, many of them were new visitors. These are people that typically didn't go to state parks, that weren't campers, or weren't paddle boarders, or any of those things. And so they really were new, baby users in a lot of ways. People that would think, oh well, we're in the woods, so I guess we'll just go cut down a tree for firewood. and you can't really do that in a park, and so having to educate people who maybe went to the local sporting goods store, bought a paddle board, and all of a sudden they're on the lake. And they maybe aren't aware of the fact that by regulation you've got to have a PFD, a personal flotation device, a life jacket with you when you're doing those things. So really educating these new users about campground etiquette. Don't let your kids run and play and cut through other people's camp spaces, things like that.
So, like you had brought up the safety vests, were there any other safety concerns that needed to be addressed during these busy times?
You know, I think, and I bet you everybody's going to understand this. One, it's a stressful year. 2020 has just maxed everybody out. And so, you have all these people that are saying, oh, I'm going to go out to this park. I'm going to have a great weekend. I'm going to blow off some steam and I'm going to have fun. And sometimes that have fun gets a little bit out of hand. You get people that, maybe drink too much or, don't like the people in the space next to them. And so you have the typical, law enforcement kind of things where you get, a diverse crowd of people into one area. And another challenge this year really was kind of the change in respect level that people have for regulation, that people have for even law enforcement and contact from some of our rangers. There seems to be less respect, and so there was a lot more pushback when you go and talk to somebody and say, "Hey, be careful," or "You can't do that," or "You need to do this," or "I'm going to have to write you a citation for that." A lot more pushback, and so it really pushed our people to be, very very sure of how they're working with all of those people, how they're interacting.
That's very disheartening. I always think of Colorado as a place of respect and care for one another. To hear that is very disheartening. I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
Well, and it was frustrating, I think, for our staff, which was unfortunate. We had a wrap up where we got all the park managers and senior rangers together, and we're talking about some of those issues, and it was a little bit disheartening, I think, for them too. But it shows that we have to continue to work as an agency to be respectful in how we make contact with people. Our officers are trained. They're specialists in resource management. Our wildlife officers have biology degrees. They're not law enforcement people. When they come on board with us, that's where they get that law enforcement training. And so we do a very, very good job of making sure that, when they're contacting people, they're being respectful and those things. So it just really highlighted that and highlighted that training.
Randy, I feel like I'd be doing a disservice if I talked to you today and did not bring up the wildfires that are happening right now. What can you tell me about these wildfires?
Huge impact for the agency for Colorado Parks and Wildlife on two fronts. One on the park side, certainly places like State Forest State Park. State Forest State Park sits up above Walden, above east of North Park, and kind of at the top of Cameron Pass there. And the challenge of the Cameron Peak fire has been for most of the month of September just completely shut off State Forest State Park from access from the east side. So people that would generally, vacation there or visit State Forest State Park could not get through that way. And so for a few weeks they were all going north, and they could cut around through Wyoming and come down south into North Park and get up to State Forest State Park that way. Then the Mullen fire sparked up, and that cut off the access from the north side. So, State Forest State Park starts the summer like all of our parks, just with huge visitation. And then all of a sudden, those fires really shut that down. It also, really impacted places like Steamboat Lake State Park. At Steamboat Lake, you see things like smoke, so air quality conditions that were poor. It wasn't necessarily wildfires, but it was the increased temperatures, the drought conditions, and state forest dealt with a bit of an algae bloom that they typically don't see due to warm water conditions. So they had to close the lake to human contact for a couple of weeks during the summer as well. But wildfires have been a tremendous impact to our parks. They also have an impact on our wildlife in Colorado. And that's something our agency has to manage as well, especially now as we're headed into the major hunting seasons, and trying to make sure that hunters have access to areas and all of those things.
Now, with the impact on the wildlife, there, you had tons of wildlife running away from these fires. Are we to see more elk in Steamboat Springs and more bears, for example, or is that just something I'm making up in my own head?
No, it's pretty intuitive. It's kind of the way it works. People think that these wildfires are massively devastating for wildlife, and the reality is wildfire is part of the Western ecosystem. Wildfires have been part of what happens in Colorado for forever. And so the animals have really evolved in a system where fire is very common. It's only been the last 50 years where we as humans have said, oh, let's put all those out. And so, it's a very, very small window of fighting fires, but wildlife knows what to do. They move out, and you can see things like more bears, more elk, along roadways, and all of those things, because of those fires. But if you really take a look at the amount of public land in Colorado, just public land, this doesn't even include any of the private land, but we're talking about 23.5 million acres of public land in Colorado. Of that, fires are, around 1 million acres. So there's really lots and lots of space out there, that isn't affected by the fires, and the wildlife tends to find their way through that. I'll tell you a quick one, Eric. The species that is most affected by wildfire, and people don't think about this, but the
Birds.
species that's most affected by wildfire, that was actually a really good guess. I like that. Fish. Fish
Oh,
are the most affected by wildfire. People go, well, wait, they're in the water. Why does fire affect them? It's not the active fire that affects fish, but after the fires are out, you get some rain, and all that ash washes into the streams, and it can suffocate fish and certainly cement their feeding areas and breeding areas. And so fish are impacted by wildfires probably more than most species. Birds are second. People go, well, they can fly away. Well, not if they're in a nest, and in an egg or a young bird, and so they can be very impacted as well.
I would have never guessed fish. That's
Right?
crazy. It makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, it's not just the impact of the fire; it's the whole story of the fire, the whole timeline, the ash, all of it.
Yeah.
Crazy. So, what can be expected from Parks and Wildlife heading into the winter season?
It's funny. The park managers have been talking recently about the fact that we actually have, reservations for campgrounds booked into November, and even towards the end of November, which is unheard of. But people are, despite winter coming, they're saying, "Hey, I'm getting outdoors. I don't care. I'm going outside." So we anticipate a very busy winter season. We will certainly be watching. We want to advise people with safety, techniques and things, for ice fishing, making sure ice is thick enough. So we'll be putting out a lot of information about that. Backcountry, skiing, snowmobiling, those things. There's going to be a lot of new people at that too. So we've got to make sure those people are safe, keeping themselves safe, doing it in a way that's respectful of wildlife, and all of those things too. So you're going to hear a lot more from Colorado Parks and Wildlife as we crank into winter.
Awesome. Well, Randy, I thank you for joining me today, and I hope to have you back on air another soon to talk more about what else is going on.
Absolutely happy to join you anytime, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Stay safe out there, and stay tuned. We have more show coming to you right after this.
You're watching Mountain TV Steamboat.